I started for school very late that morning and was in great dread of scolding, especially because M. Hamel had said that he would question us on participles, and I didn't know the first word about them. Here, the narrator of the story is a young school-going boy named Franz. That morning, he was scared as he was late for school. Also, as the teacher M. Hamel had announced the previous day that he would test them on the topic of participles, and Franz did not know anything at all. He was more scared of being scolded. For a moment, I thought of running away and spending the day out of doors. It was so warm, so bright. The bats were chirping at the edge of the roads, and the open field back of the sawmill. The Persian soldiers were drilling. Here, Franz had another option in his mind to miss the school and enjoy the day out in the warm and bright weather. He describes the scene. There were birds chirping on the trees, and the noise of the Persian soldiers doing the drill behind the sawmill could also be heard. That's what he is saying there. It was all much more tempting than the rules for participles, but I had strength to resist and hurried off to school. Finally, the scene outside was more attractive than the school, but Franz controlled the temptation of going there and chose to attend the school. That's what the author explains here. When I passed the town hall, there was a crowd in front of the bulletin board. For 2 years, all our bad news had come from there. The lost battles, the draft, the orders of the commanding officer, and though to myself without stopping, what can be the matter now? As Franz walked past to the town hall, he noticed a huge crowd at the notice board. The war was with the Persian had begun 2.5 years ago, and since all the bad news like closing the war, occupation of Alsace and Lorraine by the enemy, example Persia, etc., had been communicated to the people through this bulletin board only. Franz kept on walking towards the school and thought in his mind that what news could have been put off the board now? And then, as I hurried as fast as I could go, the blacksmith watcher, who was with his apprentice reading the bulletin board after me. Don't go fast, Bob. You will get your school in plenty of time. I thought he was making fun of me, and I reached M. Hamel's little garden all out of the breath. So, here the author walked hurriedly towards the school. The blacksmith, who was also reading the news and had come along with his trainee, called out to Franz from behind and said he needn't go in such a hurry as there was plenty of time for him to reach school. Franz thought that the blacksmith was making fun of him, of course, as he was already late for school. When Franz reached the garden outside the school, he was out of breath as he had walked very fast. Usually, when the school began, there was a great bustle which could be heard out in the street. The opening and closing of desk, lesson repeated in unison, very loud with your hands over ears, to understand better, and the teacher's great ruler rapping on the table. Franz described the usual scene at the school in the morning. A lot of noise created by moving desks, children repeating their lessons, and teachers striking the table with the rulers could be heard. It's most often all the schools might have the same thing he describes there. But now it was all so still. I had counted on the commotion to get to my desk without being seen, but of course, that day everything had to be as quiet as Sunday morning. Especially on that day was unusual as there was so much sound coming out of the school, and it seemed that the school was closed as it is used to be on Sunday morning. Franz had planned that he would take cover under the commotion and reach the class without being noticed, but that did not seem possible because school was that much silent. That was the reason for that. Through the window, I saw my classmates already in their places and M. Hamel walking up and down with his terrible iron ruler and under his arms. Actually, here Franz peeped inside his class. He looked inside his class and saw his classmate Seated and M. Hamel, their teacher, walking with the class with a ruler made of iron placed under his arms. Franz feared of beating. He afraid to get beat. I had to open the door and go in before everybody. You can imagine how I blushed and how frightened I was. Franz was ashamed of being late and feared of scolding as he had to enter the classroom in front of everyone. But nothing happened. M. Hamel saw me and said very kindly, "Go to your place quickly, little Franz. We were beginning with you." Franz found it strange as M. Hamel did not say anything and, on the contrary, politely asking him to go to his place. As the class was about to begin without him, okay, the class is going to begin without him. So immediately he enters, so he invites him very gently to the classroom. That was a surprise for him. I jumped over the bench and sat down at my desk. Not still then. When I had got a little over my fright, did I see that our teacher had on his beautiful green coat, his frilled shirt, and the little black silk cape, all embroidered, that he never wore except on inspection and prize days. Franz hurried to his seat. After some time, when he overcome the scare and become comfortable, he noticed that the teacher had worn his best embroidered that day. The teacher normally wore it on occasions like inspection and prize distribution days. Franz wondered if that day was normal day, then what could be the reason for M. Hamel to wear the special dress? It was a surprise for him to see in this special attire. Besides, the whole school seemed so strange and solemn. But the thing that surprised me most was to see on the backbenches that were always empty, the village people sitting quietly like ourselves. Old Gazu, with his three-cornered hat, the farmer mayor, the farmer postmaster, and several others beside. Franz felt that the atmosphere in the school was unusual and serious. To add to it, the last benches of the classroom were occupied by the senior villageman. Azul, who was wearing his three-cornered hat, the retired mayor, postmaster, etc. Everybody looked sad, and Azul had brought an old primer thumbed at the edge, and he held it open on his knees with his great spectacles lying across the pages. They all looked sad. Azul brought his reader, which was old and torn. He had opened it and kept it on his knees and had placed his spectacles on it. While I was wondering about it all, M. Hamel mounted his chair and, in the same grave and gentle tone which he had used to me, said, "My children, this is the lesson I shall give you. The hour has come from Berlin to teach only German in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine. The new master comes tomorrow. This is your last French lesson. I want you to be very attentive." Franz was confused and could not figure out what was happening at the day. Just then, Emmanuel told them that it was their last lesson in French, as the Persian in Berlin had ordered the French language would no longer be taught in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine, and that German language be taught instead. The German teacher would arrive the next day, and as this was the last lesson in French, he wanted them to pay attention. What a thunderclap his words were to me! Oh, the wretches! That was what they had put up at the town hall. Franz was shocked to know that he could not learn French any longer, and now he knew the latest news that had been put up on the bulletin board of the town hall. My last French lesson. Why, I hardly knew how to write. I should never learn any more. I must stop there. Then, oh, how sorry I was for not learning my lesson, for seeking bad eggs or going to sliding on the shore. Franz regretted for being serious towards the studies and for wasting his time in hunting bats, eggs, and playing in the Saar River. He really regrets his decision which he made earlier. My books that had seemed such a nuisance a while ago, so heavy to carry, my grammar and my history of the science, were old friends now that I couldn't give up. Till now, Franz considered his books to be an unwanted burden, but suddenly he starts considering them to be his best friends, whom he could never leave. The writer wants to show the change in Franz's attitude towards the study after hearing the news that he could not learn French any longer. And M. Hamel too, the idea that he was going away, that I should never see him again, made me forget all about his ruler and how cranky he was. The news that the teacher M. Hamel was leaving also had a similar impact on him. Franz did not want him to go away. He no longer thought that the teacher to be short-tempered and strict. Poor man, it was in honor of his last lesson that he had put on his fine Sunday clothes, and now I understood why the old men of the village were sitting there in the back of the room. Now Franz knew that M. Hamel was wearing his best dress in honor of his last lesson. He also realizes that the village men had come to pay respect and thank M. Hamel for his service of 40 years in that school. It was because they were sorry too that they had not gone to school more. It was their way of thanking our masters for his 40 years of faithful service and showing their respect for him for him, for the country that was theirs no more. The village men had come to the class as they were also repeating for not have studied well in their childhood. They had come to thank their teacher for his 40 years of service as a French teacher. Also, they wanted to show respect to their country and were sad as their mother tongue, French, would no longer be taught to them. While I was thinking of all this, I heard my name called. It was my turn to recite. What would I not have given to be able to say that dreadful rule for the participle? Although very louder and clear and without one mistake. The teacher calls out the friends as his turn to recite the topic of participles. As the news had impacted France, he was eager to study and so he was desperate to show his eagerness. He wanted to be able to recite the topic in one go and without any mistake and please his teacher. His desperation in reflect in his willingness to give away all that he had in return for reciting the lesson well. But I got mixed up on the first words and stood there, holding on to my desk, my heart beating and not daring to look up. As Franz did not know the lesson, he got confused and stood quietly. His heart was beating fast as he was ashamed of himself and did not have the courage to face the teacher. As I heard Emmanuel says to me, I won't scold you, little Franz. You must feel bad enough. See how it is every day we have said to ourselves, bah, I have plenty of time, I will learn it tomorrow, and now you see where we have come out. And Hamel said to Franz that he would not scold him, as now he had realized his mistake. Every day Franz told himself that he would study the next day, and now the opportunity to the study had entered, and he knew nothing. As that's a great trouble with Alsep. She puts off learning till tomorrow. Now these fellows out there will have their right to say to you, how is it you pretend to be Frenchmen and yet you can neither speak nor write your own language, but you are not the worst, poor little Franz. We have all a great deal to reapproach ourselves with. M. Hamel says that all the people of Alsace were to be blamed as no one was serious towards learning. He tells the class that enemies would laugh at them and say that they only show to be Frenchmen as they can neither speak nor write their own language. He says that France should not feel guilty as everyone is at fault. Your parents were not anxious enough to have you learn. They prefer put to work on a farm or the mills as to have a little more money. And I have been blaming also. Have I not often sent you to water my flowers instead of learning your lessons? And when I wanted to go fishing, did I not just give you a holiday? Hamel says that Franz's parents were not interested in getting him educated. They wanted him to work at a farm or a mill and earn some money. He says that as a teacher, he was also not interested in teaching them. He would send them to his home to water the plants. Sometimes he would declare a holiday and go for fishing. Then, from one thing to another, M. Hamel went on to talk of the French language, saying that it was the most beautiful language in the world, the clearest, the most logical, that we must guard it among us. Never forget it, because when people are enslaved, As long as they hold fast their language, it is as if they had the key to their prison. M. Hamel praises their mother tongue, French language as being the most beautiful and the clearest, most logical language in the world. He tells the class to guard their language, and it is the only way to the free oneself from the prison of slavery. If a person knows his mother tongue well, no one can enslave him. Knowing the mother tongue well as a language is a tool to fight domination. Then he opened a grammar and read us our lesson. I was amazed to see how well I understood it. All he said seemed so easy I think too, that I had never listened so carefully, and that he had never explained everything with so much patience. It seemed almost as if the poor man wanted to give us all he knew before he going away, and to put it all into our hands at one stroke. The teacher took the lessons in the grammar. That day, Franz was surprised that he understood the lesson with ease. He felt that he had been attentive and that M. Hamel also explained the lesson with a lot of patience. Franz felt that the teacher wanted to give them all the knowledge he had before leaving the place. After the grammar, we had a lesson in writing. That day, M. Hamel had new copies for us, written in a beautiful round hand. Franz, Alsek, Franz, Alsek. After grammar, they had a lesson in writing. M. Hamel gave the class a new notebook with Franz Alsek, beautifully written on them. They looked like little flags floating everywhere in the schoolroom, hung from the rail at the top of our desk. You ought to have see how everyone set to work and how quiet it was. The only sound was scratching of the pens over the paper. Franz felt that here was an air of patriotism in the class. The books were like a flags of France that were floating all around. The entire class was busy in writing, and the only sound that could be heard was that of the pen writing on the paper. Some butterflies flew in, but nobody paid any attention to them, not even the listless ones who worked right on tracing their first hooks, as if fish hooks, as if that was French too. Once some mosquitoes flew into the class, but no one panicked as everyone was busy writing. The writer considered the pigeons sitting on the roof of the class to be students as well, and says that even the pigeons were busy scratching on the roof with their class, and it seemed that they were also busy writing tasks of French language. On the roof of pigeons cooed very low, and I thought to myself, will they make them to sing German, even the pigeons? The coo sound of the pigeons could be heard in the class, and the Franz wondered that would the Persians forces the pigeons also to change their language and coo in German? The writer wants to say that language comes naturally to a being and it cannot be forced upon anyone, be it the pigeons or the Frenchman. Whenever I looked up from my writing, I saw M. Hamel sitting motionless in his chair and gazing first at one thing, then at another, as if he wanted to fix in his mind just how everything looks in that little schoolroom. In between writing, Franz looked at M. Hamel, who sat still and stared at the different things in the classroom in succession as if he wanted to memorize the appearance of everything before leaving. Fancy, for 40 years he had been there in the same place with his garden outside the window and his class in front of him. Just like that, only the desk and benches had been worn smooth. The walnut trees in the garden were taller and the hope vine that he had planted himself twined about the windows to the roof. How it must have broken his heart to leave it all, poor man, to hear his sister moving about in the room above, packing their trunks, for they must leave the country next day. Franz feel that teacher must be heartbroken to be sent away from the place where he had spent 40 years of his life. The noises of the sister packing the moving their luggage could be heard from the room upstairs as they had to leave the next day. But he had the courage to hear every lessons to the every last. After the writing, if we had a lessons in history, and then babies chanted their ba, bee, bee, boo, boo. Hamel remained composed at the heard the lesson from the entire class. After the writing task, the class was a lesson in the history followed by phonetics where they recite the sounds of alphabet. Franz refers to the class as babies because although they were grown up, they were reciting the lessons of phonetics, which is usually done by younger children. So he called himself and his class to be babies. Down there at the back of the room, old Hazur and put on his spectacles and holding his primer in both hands, spelled the letters with them. You could see that he too was crying. His voice trembled with emotions, and it was so funny to hear him that we all wanted to laugh and cry. Ah, how well I remember it that last lesson. Hazur had put on his spectacles and holding the primer in his both hands, recited the letters with the class. He was carrying, crying, his voice and trembled, he spoke. Franz had mixed feelings. He found it funny to see how an old man like Hazur was crying and trembling. And on the other side, he also felt emotional like Hazur did. Franz could never forget his last lessons. At once, the church clock struck 12, then Douglas. And just then, the clock at the church struck 12 and the prayer song began. At the same moment, trumpets of the Persians returning from the drill sounded under our windows. M. Hamel stood up, very pale in his chair. I never saw him look so tall. At the same moment, the sound of the trumpets played by the Persian soldiers who were returning from the drill was heard. M. Hamel's face became dull and colorless as the time had come for the class to get over. He stood straight and motionless, and Franz says that he had never appeared to be so tall. My friends, said he, I, but something choked him. He could not go on. Then he turned to the blackboard, took a piece of chalk, and bearing with all his might, he wrote as large as he could, Vive la France. M. Hamel began to speak but could not continue as he was overpowered by his emotions. He took a piece of chalk and wrote the word Vive la France, meaning long live France, on the blackboard as large as he could. Then he stopped and leaned his head against the wall, and without a word he made a gesture as with his hand. School is dismissed. You may go. Then he stopped writing, bent towards the wall, and without speaking anything, signaled the class to leave as the class was over.